Hi there, and welcome back to Haunting Vales. Today, we step into a story filled with charm, elegance, and hidden danger. Behind the gentle clinking of teacups and the soft chatter of a refined tea room, a deadly, secret brews. Deception is served alongside pastries, and every polite smile may mask a darker truth. This is the Tea Room Conspiracy, a Hercule Poirot mystery where nothing is as simple as it seems. Chapter 1. The Gathering at Belgravia. In the heart of London, on a rain-slicked afternoon where the sky hung low and gray, a warm glow spilled from the windows of Madame Rosamond's tea room. Nestled in Belgravia, the establishment was famous not only for its rare teas imported from distant gardens, but also for its patrons, women of refinement, intellect, and whispers of scandal. On this particular afternoon, Hercule Poirot, the meticulous Belgian detective with his immaculate mustaches and polished shoes, found himself seated at a corner table. He did not come for tea, nor for gossip, but because his friend, Inspector Japp, had mentioned that curious happenings had begun to orbit this fashionable tea room. It is nothing official, Poirot, Japp had shrugged. But the place is crawling with society ladies, and now there are rumors of letters gone missing, arguments over inheritances, even a poisoning scare last week. If anyone can sniff out mischief before it turns serious, it's you. And so Poirot sat, sipping his delicate jasmine infusion with the precision of a man timing the universe by each drop. His eyes, sharp beneath half-closed lids, scanned the room. At the center, in her customary seat by the fireplace, sat Lady Constance Whitmore, a widow of formidable presence and sharper tongue. Beside her, Mrs. Lydia Arkwright, a novelist who mined society's secrets for inspiration, leaned in, taking notes in her mind as she always did. Near the window, Miss Eleanor Finch, a spinster with quiet manners but a reputation for knowing too much, gazed at the rain with a look of concern etched on her face. Across from Poirot, a young waitress trembled slightly as she poured tea. Poirot noted her trembling not as clumsiness, but as fear. Someone, he thought, had unsettled the harmony of this place. The door chimed, and in swept Madame Rosamond herself, the proprietress, dressed in deep burgundy velvet with a string of pearls glistening against her throat. She greeted each guest with charm, but Poirot noticed a flicker of unease behind her smile. When she reached Poirot's table, she lowered her voice. "Monsieur Poirot, I am most grateful you accepted my invitation. I fear that something dreadful is building here, beneath the surface. I cannot say it aloud, for my patrons expect only warmth and civility, but—" her voice trembled, just as the waitress's hands had. "I believe someone means harm." Poirot inclined his head, his fingertips meeting in a steeple. "Madam, the tea leaves, they are not the only thing that can tell a future. The behavior of people, the unease in their gestures, they too tell a story. Already, I see that this tea room is no mere place of refreshment. It is a stage, and someone is preparing for their grand performance." Before Madame Rosamond could reply, a sudden cry cut through the gentle murmur of conversation. Lady Constance Whitmore clutched her throat, her teacup shattering on the table before her. Gasps erupted as she collapsed sideways in her chair, her pearl brooch snapping loose and clattering to the floor. Women screamed, cups spilled, the rain outside pounded harder as though echoing the chaos within. Poirot was already on his feet. "Stand back, mesdames. Give her the air, s'il vous plaît." His voice, calm but commanding, restored order for a moment. He knelt beside Lady Constance, checking her pulse with care. She was alive, barely, but her breathing rasped as though something had constricted within her. Poison? Or a sudden seizure? Poirot's eyes narrowed as he scanned the table before her. The teacup lay cracked, its golden rim catching the light. A faint smell lingered in the air, bitter, out of place among the floral aromas of Earl Grey and chamomile. Poirot inclined his head, his fingertips meeting in a steeple. "Madam, the tea leaves, they're not the only thing that can tell a future. The behavior of people, the unease in their gestures, They too tell a story. Already, I see that this tea room is no mere place of refreshment. It is a stage, and someone is preparing for their grand performance. Before Madame Rosamond could reply, a sudden cry cut through the gentle murmur of conversation. Lady Constance Whitmore clutched her throat, her teacup shattering on the table before her. Gasps erupted as she collapsed sideways in her chair, her pearl brooch snapping loose and clattering to the floor. Women screamed, cups spilled, the rain outside pounded harder as though echoing the chaos within. Poirot was already on his feet. "Stand back, mesdames. Give her the air, s'il vous plaît." His voice, calm but commanding, restored order for a moment. He knelt beside Lady Constance, checking her pulse with care. She was alive, barely, but her breathing rasped as though something had constricted within her. Poison? Or a sudden seizure? Poirot's eyes narrowed as he scanned the table before her. The teacup lay cracked, its golden rim catching the light. A faint smell lingered in the air, bitter, out of place among the floral aromas of Earl Grey and chamomile. The women gathered around in a storm of whispers, some wringing their hands, others already casting suspicious glances at rivals. Madame Rosamond wrung her pearl-gloved hands in distress. The young waitress stood frozen, pale as parchment, as if she had seen this coming. Poirot rose slowly, his gaze sweeping the room, taking in each expression, each tremor, each attempt to appear innocent. And then he spoke with measured gravity. "Mesdames, we're no longer in a tea room. We are in the theater of crime. And Hercule Poirot is compelled to discover whether this was an accident of fate or the beginning of a conspiracy most sinister." The room fell into stunned silence as the rain drummed harder, sealing them inside. Chapter 2. Whispers Behind Porcelain. The storm outside pounded against the windows of Madame Rosamond's tea room with a force that rattled the glass and cast flickering shadows across the polished tables and silver spoons. The city beyond was cloaked in water and fog, but inside, the air was thick with something far heavier than the weather: fear. The patrons had not left. Indeed, they could not, for the downpour had rendered the streets nearly impassable, and carriages and motor cars alike stood abandoned in the lanes outside. The soft chime of the tea room's door had ceased altogether, replaced by the constant drone of rain and the anxious murmur of voices. Poirot stood like a sentinel at the heart of the storm within, his small frame steady, his eyes sharp, his mind already weaving threads of suspicion into patterns invisible to others. Lady Constance Whitmore lay upstairs, tended by the physician hastily summoned, and her sudden collapse had transformed this genteel gathering into a chamber of intrigue. Madame Rosamond, though visibly shaken, insisted on maintaining a semblance of order. "Ladies," she pleaded, her hands clasped at her waist, "please do not give way to panic. Lady Constance is in capable hands. We must remain calm until we know more." Yet her voice trembled, and Poirot, who observed everything from the arch of an eyebrow to the tremor of a teacup, noted how her eyes flitted nervously toward the young waitress who had served the table. There was a story here, and like all stories, it could not remain hidden beneath porcelain and lace for long. Inspector Japp, his rain-soaked coat left dripping in the corner, began his work in his usual brisk fashion. He moved among the women with his notebook, asking questions with a bluntness that grated against the refined atmosphere. "What did you see? What did you smell? Who touched the cup?" His questions, practical but inelegant, stirred up whispers that grew louder with each answer. Some were indignant at the suspicion cast upon them, others defensive, and still others too quick to point fingers at rivals. Poirot allowed Japp his work, but he himself listened differently. He listened to pauses between words, to the way hands fluttered or stilled, to how eyes betrayed what lips concealed. Mrs. Lydia Arkwright, her penmanship-stained fingers fiddling with the clasp of her handbag, leaned forward when asked to recount the moment. "I was watching her, yes." Lady Constance raised her cup with the same hauteur she always does, as though she were sipping judgment rather than tea. But there was nothing unusual. She drank, she set the cup down, and then Then she gasped and clutched at her throat. That was all. She paused, her lips curving into something between dread and relish. It was dramatic, Inspector. Almost too dramatic. As though staged. Poirot's mustaches twitched at that word. Staged. The novelist had a flair for embellishment, and yet sometimes those who embroidered the truth left stray threads that pointed back to reality. Miss Eleanor Finch, in contrast, seemed eager to withdraw from the circle of attention. She sat near the window, her hands clasped tightly around the stem of her teacup, though she had not drunk a drop. Her eyes darted nervously toward Poirot when he approached her. "Monsieur," she said softly, "I must tell you, there was a smell. Only faint, but I noticed it. Bitter almonds, perhaps. I am sensitive to scents." It clung to the air just as Lady Constance lifted her cup. Her voice wavered, and Poirot inclined his head gravely. Bitter almonds, the very whisper of cyanide. Whether real or imagined, the detail was not trivial. Yet Poirot noted how Miss Finch's voice cracked, how her shoulders hunched as though bracing against unseen accusation. She was either a timid truth-teller or a nervous deceiver rehearsing lines too fragile to sustain. The young waitress, whom Poirot had observed trembling earlier, was now the focus of several pointed glances. She wrung her hands, her apron spotted with droplets of spilled tea from the commotion. "I swear, sir, I did nothing wrong. I poured the tea as I always do, from the pot the kitchen prepared. I would never harm a guest, never." Poirot's gaze softened, but he did not release her from scrutiny. Her fears seemed genuine, but fear itself was no proof of innocence. And yet, when her eyes darted toward Madame Rosamond as though seeking guidance, Poirot caught the flicker of something unsaid between them, an unspoken pact of silence, or perhaps a burden shared. Poirot moved to the tea table itself, now abandoned, the cups cooling, the fragments of Lady Constance's shattered porcelain still glistening on the cloth. He studied the remains with the precision of a jeweler appraising a gem. For cups untouched, their surfaces unbroken, their aromas unaltered. One cup, destroyed in its fall, but betraying to his refined senses the faint tang of bitterness beneath the floral veil of Darjeeling. He touched the rim with his handkerchief, lifting it gently to his nose. "Yes," he murmured, so softly only those closest heard. "Poirot has the nose, and the nose tells him this was no accident." The room erupted in whispers, the women leaning into one another, suspicions forming like cracks in porcelain. Mrs. Arkwright's eyes gleamed with the thrill of drama. Miss Finch seemed to shrink further into herself. Madame Rosamond stood pale, but resolute, as though holding her tea-room together with sheer force of will. Jap, impatient with the murmurings, snapped his notebook shut. "All right, enough whispering. Nobody leaves until we sort this out. Lady Constance might be fighting for her life, and if this is poison, then one of you had a hand in it." Poirot raised a hand delicately. "Mon cher Jap, aroma. This is not a matter to be rushed. In matters of tea, as in matters of crime, one must steep the leaves with patience if one wishes the flavor of truth to emerge." His calmness, his almost playful metaphor, drew uneasy laughter from some, indignation from others. But it had the desired effect. The room quieted, and eyes once again turned to him. He began to walk slowly around the room, his polished shoes making the faintest sound against the carpet. He paused beside each woman, not always speaking, but observing, the way Mrs. Arkwright's fingers tapped impatiently, the way Miss Finch's breathing quickened when silence lingered too long, the way the young waitress shifted as though standing on trial. Poirot's silence became its own kind of interrogation, and when he finally spoke again, his words were weighted with intent. "Mesdames, there is here more than an attempt at murder. There is unease, there is fear, there is rivalry. Lady Constance was not a woman without enemies. She was, how shall we say, formidable. She held influence, yes, but also secrets. And secrets, like tea leaves, may be bitter or sweet depending on who tastes them. Someone here has sought to ensure that a secret remained hidden. Or perhaps that a grudge was at last repaid. The words hung in the air, a net cast wide. Some faces blanched, others flushed, and still others hardened into masks of indignation. Poirot saw it all, every flicker, every tremor. The conspiracy, he knew, was not a single act of poison in a cup. It was something wider, a web that stretched across the women gathered here, and perhaps even beyond the tea room itself. As thunder rolled outside, Poirot returned to his seat by the fireplace. He folded his hands neatly, his eyes still scanning the room, even as he appeared to rest. "It will take time, mesdames, but Poirot assures you, this conspiracy, so carefully hidden, will reveal itself. And when it does, there will be no escape for the guilty." A silence followed, deeper than before. Behind porcelain cups and polished manners, behind the perfume and pearls, something darker shifted. Each woman wondered who among them carried the shadow of guilt. And in the flicker of candlelight reflected on the windows, Poirot alone seemed entirely untroubled, for he already sensed the pattern beginning to take shape, like the first strokes of a painting whose final form only he could see. Chapter 3. The Hidden Rivalries. The storm did not let up. Sheets of rain lashed against the windows of Madame Rosamond's tea room, as though the city itself conspired to keep its occupants within. The candles flickered in protest, and the once welcoming warmth of the hearth now seemed to throw restless shadows across the walls. The ladies who had gathered here no longer sipped their tea with the ease of polite company. Their cups remained largely untouched, the porcelain cooling with each passing moment, and conversation faltered into hushed exchanges. The collapse of Lady Constance Whitmore had turned the gathering into a crucible, where every glance, every whispered word, seemed to betray a hidden grievance. Hercule Poirot, seated with an air of calm reflection, though his mind was alight with activity, knew that the heart of this mystery lay not merely in the poisoned cup, but in the tangled rivalries that bound these women together. Lady Constance was not loved, that much was certain. Respected, yes. Feared, unquestionably. But loved? Poirot doubted it. In his experience, a woman of such influence and sharp tongue did not pass through life without leaving behind wounds and resentments. Now, with her life hanging by a thread upstairs, those resentments began to surface, delicate as steam rising from a freshly poured cup, yet no less telling. He began his inquiries not with direct accusations, but with gentle probes, designed to make the mask slip ever so slightly. He approached Mrs. Lydia Arkwright first, who sat with her back straighter than ever, her eyes glittering with a mixture of dread and fascination. A novelist, always hungry for drama, she seemed almost invigorated by the tragedy that had unfolded. Poirot inclined his head politely. "Madam, you are the observer, the recorder of human folly. Tell me, what do you see here among your companions?" She lifted her chin, savoring the invitation. "What I see, Monsieur Poirot, is envy. Rivalry. Oh, Lady Constance never stepped lightly upon the hearts of others. She wielded her fortune and her tongue like weapons. Why, only last week she quarreled with Eleanor Finch about some matter of inheritance, something to do with a contested cousin's estate. And then there was her refusal to support Madame Rosamond's petition for expanded business rights in Belgravia. Constance claimed such liberties were unseemly for a woman. She delighted in cutting others down. She leaned closer, her voice a theatrical whisper. If you ask me, there is no shortage of motives in this room." Poirot smiled faintly. "Ah, but it is not the abundance of motives that interests Poirot, but the precision. Who had the motive and the opportunity, mesdames, that is the true recipe for the crime." Miss Eleanor Finch, when approached, shrank at first, her slender frame drawn tightly into her chair as though she might vanish into its upholstery. Yet beneath her meek demeanor, Poirot sensed a rigidity, a pride not easily broken. When asked about the quarrel Mrs. Arkwright had mentioned, Eleanor's pale face flushed. "It was nothing, monsieur. A family dispute, the kind that arises in every lineage. Constance, she was cruel, Yes, but I would not wish her harm. Believe me, I would not. Poirot's eyes lingered on her trembling hands. And yet, mademoiselle, you spoke of the scent of almonds, a detail both delicate and damning. If you imagined it, you are mistaken. If you truly smelled it, then you noticed something no one else did. Such attentiveness can be dangerous, both to the guilty and the innocent. Her lips parted as if to protest, but no words came. Instead, she bowed her head, her silence speaking louder than denial. Madame Rosamond, who had remained largely at the periphery, was next. The proprietress of the tea-room carried herself with an elegance that was slowly unraveling at the seams. Her establishment, her livelihood, was now the scene of potential scandal, and her composure cracked under the weight. Poirot's voice softened when he addressed her. "Madam, I see in your eyes the fear, not only of crime, but of ruin. Yet if you hold something back, it will fester, and Poirot will find it out in time. Better, is it not, to speak openly now?" She hesitated, her fingers tightening on the string of pearls around her neck. "It is not I who should speak," she murmured. "Ask the girl." Her eyes flicked toward the young waitress, who stiffened at the implication. Poirot filed the reaction away, with the care of a librarian cataloging a rare manuscript. Here was a thread to be pulled later. The young waitress, barely out of her teens, looked cornered when Poirot at last turned his attention to her. "Mademoiselle," he said gently, "you have the face of one who fears being crushed beneath the secrets of others. Yet it is often those least regarded who see the most. Tell me, what burdens you?" Tears welled in her eyes, and for a moment it seemed she might confess something of significance. But then, with a swallow, she shook her head. "It is nothing, sir. I did as I was told. I poured the tea, nothing more." The phrasing struck Poirot like a dissonant note in an otherwise harmonious melody. "As I was told." By whom? And why emphasize obedience so strongly? He said nothing, only nodded kindly, but in his mind the phrase grew louder with every repetition. Meanwhile, Inspector Japp conducted his own inquiries with brusque efficiency. He returned to Poirot after half an hour, shaking his head. "They're all pointing fingers, Poirot. Each one's got a grudge, and each one's got an alibi of sorts. It's like trying to drink tea with a sieve. Everything slips through." Poirot chuckled softly. "You see, Japp, that is the problem. You look for what slips through, but Poirot, he looks for what clings. And I see already, there are rivalries here deeper than mere disagreements. They are wounds, and wounds, when pressed, bleed." As the evening wore on, the ladies began to fracture into groups, their alliances and enmities visible even in the way they positioned their chairs. Mrs. Arkwright whispered heatedly with another guest, a baroness of no small reputation, while Miss Finch kept to herself, her eyes darting nervously each time voices rose. Madame Rosamond moved among them, her hostess's smile brittle, her every gesture a desperate attempt to preserve civility. The young waitress remained in the corner, silent, her presence a reminder of service, yet also of subservience. And in subservience, often truths are overheard. Poirot watched it all, content to let the storm outside rage while the storm within revealed itself piece by piece. Finally, he rose, his small frame commanding silence with ease. "Mesdames," he said, his voice rich with certainty, "you sit here behind your porcelain cups, but what fills this room is not tea. It is suspicion. You accuse one another, you conceal, you deflect. But remember this, Lady Constance lies upstairs, between life and death. If she survives, she may yet speak. If she dies, then it is only Poirot who can give her justice. Either way, the truth will emerge. And when it does, it will not be gentle." His words settled over them like a shroud, and in the silence that followed, each woman felt the weight of her own secrets pressing more heavily than before. Poirot returned to his chair, folding his hands neatly. The storm continued, the candles sputtered, and the tea grew cold. But for Poirot, the picture was becoming clearer. The rivalries were no longer whispers. They were shouts hidden behind porcelain. And he, Hercule Poirot, would hear every word. Chapter 4. The Final Brew. The morning after the storm that had rattled London seemed deceptively calm. A thin veil of mist hung over the cobblestones outside the imperial tea room, softening the sharp edges of the city's bustle. The air smelled faintly of damp stone, horses, and tobacco smoke. To any passerby, the tea room looked innocent, even inviting. The lace curtains framed windows glowing amber with lamplight, and the painted lettering above the door promised refinement and tranquility. But inside, tension brewed thicker than any cup of Darjeeling. Hercule Poirot sat near the center, immaculate as ever in a dark suit and his signature waxed mustache. The small man's posture was upright, his eyes gleaming as if he alone held the final card in a very dangerous game. Across from him, Inspector Jameson shifted restlessly, his broad hands gripping the brim of his hat. A few patrons were scattered about, sipping tea, unaware, or perhaps pretending to be unaware, that the heart of a conspiracy beat just beneath their porcelain cups. Poirot tapped his fingertip lightly against his saucer. It is curious, n'est-ce pas, mon cher Jameson, how the English believe that secrets dissolve so easily into steam. But in truth, whispers are like tea leaves. They settle at the bottom, leaving patterns for the eyes that know how to read. Jameson grunted. I don't read patterns, Poirot. I follow evidence. And what I've got is this. Lady Cavendish poisoned, Lord Ashbury blackmailed, and every witness too polite, or too terrified, to say what they saw. If you got something, out with it. Poirot merely smiled. He let the silence stretch, commanding the room in a way only he could. Then, with a small gesture, he rang the tiny brass bell at the table's edge. A waiter hurried over, bowing slightly. Within moments, 3 figures joined them at the table. Lady Beatrice Cavendish's niece, Eleanor Ashbury, the charming but sly Anthony Bracknell, who had been lingering too long in the tea-room's shadowed corners. And finally, the ever-nervous proprietor, Mrs. Pembroke, who wrung her lace-trimmed handkerchief until it threatened to tear. The stage was set. Poirot leaned forward, his voice calm but firm. It is time, Mes Amos. The porcelain whispers no longer. The truth must be poured out. The 3 suspects stiffened. Eleanor's eyes darted to the floor. Anthony smirked with defiance, though his fingers tapped nervously against the table. Mrs. Pembroke looked as if she might faint on the spot. Poirot's gaze swept over them, sharp as a scalpel. The conspiracy within this tea room was never about one cup of poison. No, it was about power. Social power, political power, and the control of secrets. A conspiracy brewed slowly, like the strongest Assam, hidden beneath gestures of refinement. But every plot leaves its aroma. He began with Eleanor. Mademoiselle Ashbury, you were not here merely to sip tea. You were here because your family has been drowning in debt. The blackmail notes to Lord Ashbury were traced to your very hand. Ah, you gasped, but the handwriting, it matched too perfectly. You thought to protect your family's fortune by silencing Lady Cavendish, whose discovery of your deceit threatened everything. But you are not the poisoner. Eleanor's face flushed crimson, and tears welled, but Poirot pressed on, turning to Anthony Bracknell. Monsieur Bracknell, the charming guest who lingers too long. You see yourself as a gambler, yes? Cards, dice, fortunes made and lost. But you gamble not only with money, but with people's lives. You had dealings with Lady Cavendish. She invested in one of your ventures, did she not? When she uncovered the fraud, you risked ruin. So you conspired with another to see her silenced. But you, too, are not the hand that poured the fatal tea. Bracknell's smirk faltered, and his hand froze mid-tap. Poirot's eyes, glinting with satisfaction, shifted finally to Mrs. Pembroke. Madam, the tea-room has been your life. Every delicate cup, every embroidered cloth, every whispered conversation, it all passed through your hands. For years, you cultivated this place as more than a business. It became a web, a stage, a sanctuary where society's secrets could be overheard and, when convenient, sold. You told yourself it was harmless, a little gossip here, a nudge there. But secrets are dangerous currency. Lady Cavendish discovered the truth, that you had orchestrated more than tea service, but a quiet empire of blackmail. She threatened to expose you. And so, you brewed her final cup, laced with the quietest of poisons. The room went utterly still. Even the faint clink of a spoon against porcelain from another table ceased. Mrs. Pembroke's lips trembled, her knuckles white around the handkerchief. I only meant to protect what I built. Do you know what it is, Monsieur Poirot, for a woman to carve a place of her own in a city such as this? No man would have taken me seriously. But they spoke freely here, never suspecting. Their whispers gave me power. And she would have taken it all away. Jameson slammed his fist on the table. So you admit it. But Poirot raised a hand gently. "Non, let her speak." Mrs. Pembroke's eyes darted wildly, then lowered. "It is true. I slipped the poison into her cup. But Anthony encouraged me. He said we could control everything if she were gone. And Eleanor, oh, she was desperate, easy to draw into the web. But the choice was mine." Poirot nodded solemnly. "The little gray cells do not lie. The threads all led back to you, madam. It was not merely murder. It was a conspiracy, with you as the quiet conductor. Yet, in the end, the music always stops." Silence reigned as Jameson snapped the cuffs over Mrs. Pembroke's wrists. Eleanor wept softly into her handkerchief, while Bracknell muttered curses under his breath, knowing his own schemes would soon be revealed in court. Poirot, calm as ever, lifted his cup and sipped. "Ah, still too bitter," he murmured, setting it down. But then, such is the taste of truth. The mist outside thickened as Mrs. Pembroke was led away, her once pristine reputation shattered like broken china. Patrons whispered among themselves, stunned that such darkness had brewed beneath their genteel rituals. Poirot rose, his mustache twitching with a mixture of pride and melancholy. "You see, Monsieur Jameson, the English tea-room is like life. It appears delicate, fragile, yet it can conceal the most terrible of conspiracies. One must always look beyond the porcelain." Jameson sighed heavily. "You've done again, Poirot. I'll never look at a teacup the same way." Poirot merely smiled, adjusting his cuffs. "That, Inspector, is precisely the point." He turned toward the misty streets of London, where the fog swallowed sound and shadow alike. The case was closed, yet the memory of the whispers would linger, etched forever in the porcelain of those who dared to listen too closely. And so, the curtain falls on the tea-room conspiracy, a tale not merely of murder, but of ambition, betrayal, and the dangerous allure of secrets. If you enjoyed uncovering the mystery with Hercule Poirot, do not let this be the last time. London hides countless more secrets, and the little gray cells will be needed again. Make sure to subscribe, leave a like, and share this story with fellow mystery lovers. Until the next case, keep your eyes sharp, your mind sharper, and never trust a quiet cup of tea.